Apologies for that. But yes, we've got Jameson 15 years old. 15 years old from, again, what period are we looking at?
Again, we're talking Bow Street era, so again, 60s.
60s,
So,
easy.
and it's worth saying that because there are 2 Jameson 15s that are infamous in Irish whiskey.
3.
Are we talking about this one as well? Here are my 2 before. I'm talking about 2 that aren't this.
Oh, right, yeah, 2 that aren't this. Yes,
yeah.
Well, okay, well, then still 3.
Yes.
Anyway, we'll let him talk about his.
The first is the Millennium Irish Distillers, which was
beautiful box.
Quite possibly the last bottling. If trad pot and heavy pot homogenized subsequently, it is the last trad pot, like genuinely, really, really tailsy, musty, damp celery, slightly rubbery, heavy, ballsy pot still. In sherry for 15 years, and then there's the other Jameson 15, which is so bad.
The brown label. You're talking about the brown label. Is that? Please do not buy the brown label. And do not drink it.
Bottling.
Yeah. So yes, I'm talking about the first version you talked about. There's 2 of.
Yeah. There's 2 of those. Yeah, but that's the same liquid.
It's the same liquid.
Yeah. There's like they put it out, but so now we've gone up to 4.
Yeah, we've
Notorious Jameson. Okay. The Millennium one had it. It was just before the Millennium, just like 1999, 2001, and it changed labels slightly. But that's the same stock.
If you see that, it's in a beautiful box, beautiful presentation, and it's a must. It is a must buy.
Yeah, it's a classic. And my God, it's my favourite whiskey at 40%. Can you imagine
it's my favorite? It's my favourite Jameson.
Yeah. It's had that been bottled at a decent 46, can you imagine? What it might have. It's amazing.
But you've you have literally put out there the warning notice. The Jameson 15-year-old brown label with the beautiful gold 15 on it. Stay away. Do not drink that.
It's grim.
No, not in this. No. John's looking. Is that what's
in
here?
No, not this. This is not what we're drinking.
No, this is different. This was for. Quite specifically, it was bottled by Miller's. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a bonded before IDL under Kevin McCourt decided to slash bonding contracts and focus on in-house bottlings, with the exception of Green Spot, which was some weird. I would love to have been in the meeting where that handshake was made, like, oh yeah, we're slashing all bondage contracts except you. But there was that older relationship.
And this is much older than those other 15s we've just talked about.
Yeah.
This is much older.
So, yes, absolutely. This is
40 years old.
Yeah, this is Bow Street liquid, so it's not even the same stuff.
Yeah.
So, anyone who saw Jameson 15-year on the box might have leapt psychologically to either one, but get both of those. One is one of the most highly sought-after, geeky whiskies available, and the other is the most, in-the-know, avoided, and often mistaken for the former. But this is neither.
And that's not to say anything negative about Jameson and what they're doing just now. It's just that we're just trying to help people not, feel like they've been wrong done by buying it.
But this is a 15-year-old version of the Jameson 3-star. So this is essentially a sherry barrel aged for longer than,
So you've got that earlier one, number 3,
was the 3-star
7 years old, and this is just an extension.
Yeah.
And it's the same time period.
Yeah. And just again, you give it a smell, and it's funny because Jameson came, it was not a drop sold until it's 7 years old, and it was not a drop sold until it's 12 years old, which doesn't make any sense because, of course, if you're selling the 7-year-old, you have sold drops until it's 12. Anyway, but those were the 2, core, and of course the Redbreast 12 is the same concept as the 12-year-old Jameson, just done through Gilbey's. So it's hard to find anything above the age of 12 from these old distilleries, and it happens through other means. So the 15-year-old was, it's a pleasure, it's a joy and a privilege to get that distillate-led stock. And I went on and on about how distillate-led it was in something that would still kind of perk you up. 15 is still, we're talking about older stock now,
Miller's got a bit ballsy after that, didn't they? Because they had that, and then they actually came up with their own label.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, Bow Street had a policy, but and the old story was that if you were found blending Powers, they would stop selling to you. If you found blending Jameson, they would blacklist you and they would take you to court. Jameson were the easiest of the distilleries to track because they were so fond of suing people. But they were serious about you will not defraud the public and give them something that you're calling Jameson, you know. And if we're working with you as one of our select respectable bonders, you're going to put Jameson on the label, you know, and let people know.
Yeah.
So they were very and a tremendous degree of integrity about it.
Very much so.
And but anyway, you give that
It's
a smell.
interesting that that's not the same concept now. That we don't have, you know, someone giving you the liquid to another distillery and saying you must actually do us a favour because, you know, we produce great whiskey. Tell everyone about our whiskey as well as your own.
Yeah.
As well as your own brand.
It's an odd, a much more kind of provenance-driven obsession and place-driven, well, not even place, but like family-driven obsession, you know. We are ourselves, and the world is always going to know if it's Jameson, and if you tell people it's a Jameson, it's not a Jameson, we'll see you in the docks tomorrow morning, you know. And, but you give it a smell, and it's funny, you look at like, and I forgot to say this when we were drinking the paddy. There's a lot of fuss in malt whiskey and Scotch malt whiskey, specifically around Brewer and all these. Well, Brewer become Clynelish become Brewer become Clynelish again. You know, but this nostalgia around certain lost distilleries, Rosebank, etc. But especially with Clynelish, that idea of waxiness, of a little bit of honeycomb kind of feeling, and with pot still, it's that. With the volume dialed up because it's such a texturally dependent drink in the first place. But at the same time, when you're talking about deep sherry, you know, we always have to look back and say, oh, the wood was a bit shit. But it's such a pleasure to drink this where you're getting that spirit-led distillate for 15 years in a good sherry cask. And Jameson, above the pack, were huge into cask investment, you know. And again, you look at their partners, people like Gilbey's and Mitchell's and so forth, they took sherry very seriously. And it reminds me, more than anything we've had, of some of those, not in terms of taste, but in terms of stature, those lost distilleries of Scotland flavours, you know, the pining after some of these. And you get pot still at a decent age in a decent cask and what that would taste like. And that austerity, that strange... Of course, it still has that orange peel, pithy distillate character, but it's been given this like old school sherry musk, and I mean dry sherry. And it's funny because the sherry people drank was cream sherry. You know, was a very sweet sherry. Still is.
Yeah.
You know, all this stuff is. And that's always a big explaining point is that like Harvey's Bristol cream and all this stuff is not sherry. It's a custom-made sherry for Britain and Ireland because people drank very sweet stuff, you know, and you get Oloroso on its own, which is quite dry, you know, and Fino, which is even drier again, you know, and a whole different range of flavors. But even the cream sherry back then seemed based on Mitchell's notes anyway, was, you know, because they were blending it in-house themselves, you know, cream sherry is essentially Oloroso and PX mixed together, and is much more Oloroso driven at the time, you know, much drier characteristic. And with that musty, yet very present sherry characteristic, that tangerine, but through the kind of like, there's a room in, not to get too poncy with the flavour notes, in, what's the name of that big art gallery in London? The Tate. In the Tate Modern, they have a room, Joseph Boyd, the German artist Joseph Boyd did, but he covered the whole room in felt. And it's really an awkward room to walk in because the felt just absorbs the air. And it reminds me of that like wall-to-wall, you know, carpeting. You almost can't breathe. It's so musty.
Yeah.
It's quite strange to walk into the space. And there's some of these sherries. They were that kind of like so musty. It becomes startling. It becomes, you know, difficult to approach. And you still get, if you breathe it, inhale deeply, you still get that tangerine, that classic Bow Street tangerine. And then I haven't even given it a taste yet. Oh, weird. It's like you took, you know, with some, there's these weird textural things that go on in dead distillery pot still, where it's less oil than it is, again, like compote or jello or something. This kind of like semi-solidness firmness that kind of crumbles as you consume it. It's almost like a solid dissolving, you know, some sort of like pot still tablet dissolving in your mouth as you consume it. It's not oil at that point. Cumber has it, Bow Street has it, you know, and I don't know what's doing it. Even now, you know, is it the 15%? Because of course, same mash bill there as well. Is it the 15% oats that's wacky? Is it, well, seemingly wheat? Again, if the responses are to be believed, and there's so many other factors at play when we look at the lost distilleries, but at least for me, thumbing through the data, it seems that wheat codes in people's mouths as a texture. You know, as wheat goes up, you get a buttery sensation. And when you try some of these, you wonder, like, where are all these bewildering textures coming from? You know, is it the distillation regimen? Is it the mash bill? The mash bill is clearly very different, so one is inclined to lean that way. Is it presumably a mix of all? But anyway, there is that weird mix of musty, refined austerity, classic Bow Street tangerine, pith, kind of, and even the citrus in there is darker. And then you give it a taste. And I encourage you, like, give it a bit of a mouthful. You know, it's still pot still. It's all about texture. Don't sip it. And I think that's a big mistake a lot of people make with older Irish whiskey. They treat it like old single malt whiskey, and they're taking little nips at it. And really, pot still has always been about texture. And you want to knock it about.
You're not taking any little measures. I mean, you're just entering your vials. You're doing really well. Jason, what are we making this one?
Not a massive fan.
Not fans. That's okay. I don't think we have to be.
I agree. As Fionnán just said, taking a bigger drink of it does actually help, and you do get that sort of mouthfeel. You do feel that it's much more viscous than whiskey would be today. But you talked about it being the sort of the 3-star, being the 7-year-old, and this being almost the 15-year-old version. That is not better than the 3-star.
It's funny because they were spirit led, and I think there's a Redbreast 12 Old Era Bow Streeter in the other box, and it'd be interesting to see the three side by side as it ages, because of course this is, again, it's the same mash as the Jameson 3-star, just drenched, you know, taken down like a baptismal font, and you know, had its head plunged into this musty, austere sherry, and then brought out. And yeah, there is that weird like felt. It does taste almost like old era Speyside whiskey, like old, like damp, musty Speyside, you know, almost like Japanese, you know, old Japanese whiskey. And pot still had some sort of love child, but it's not as tangerine. It doesn't have that pith in the kind of like, how do you put it, like the spryness of the Jameson. Those orange characteristics have to be found. You have to know they're there, and you're like, oh right, no, that's still breathing. But when you have the Jameson classic bottling from Bow Street, it's like learning how to make cocktails with an orange peel and not knowing what you're doing, and just ending up with fingers that smell like pith and oil and, you know, skin and bits of fruit and whatever, and you know, the guilty secret of mine, you know, working in drink is I'm incompetent at making cocktails. You know, even at home, you know, I've never understood why my attempts at an Irish coffee taste so bad, despite the fact that I follow the instructions meticulously, and it tastes like filth, and putting it down the sink. Why do my old fashions taste so awful? And I've spoken to, you know, like I've called, you know, Kevin Hurley on the phone asking for advice, and you know, and I still don't know what I'm doing, and I just end up with really smelly fingers, and
he's still talking about making cocktails.